Released on Guns N' Roses' album Use Your Illusion 2, the song Get in the Ring, which was originally named Why Do You Look at Me When You Hate Me, or the more radio-friendly Get in the Ring Mother Effer, would take aim at the band's critics, but one thing it did differently than a lot of other diss tracks is that they named names. The band would challenge its critics to, of course, get in the ring. It would result in the band, more specifically frontman Axl Rose, looking rather foolish after some of the band's critics responded to their challenge, and years later Rose would distance himself from the song, and today we're going to take a look at the song Get in the Ring. Guns N' Roses' epic double album Use Your Illusion 1 and 2 would arrive 4 years after their first LP Appetite for Destruction. The 4-year gap between the full-length studio albums was a pretty tumultuous time for the group, who dealt with fame, drug addiction, infighting, and at times unfavorable press coverage. The band would release a stopgap EP titled GNR Lies in late 1988, and it would contain perhaps the band's most controversial track, 1 in a Million. I've done a whole video on the song 1 in a Million, the link is down below. The song's incendiary lyrics, which took aim at minorities and marginalized groups, made the band a lightning rod for controversy in the press and nearly tore the band apart. Guns N' Roses, meanwhile, felt that the press was lying about them to rock fans, and the song Get in the Ring featured the perfect opportunity to call out their critics, more specifically Spin Magazine, Hit Parader, Circus Magazine, and Kerrang! Spin Magazine, which had launched in 1985, would be the brainchild of Bob Guccione Jr., whose father was the publisher of Penthouse Magazine. Guccione Jr. had gotten a loan from his father to start the magazine, and the plan was for it to compete with Rolling Stone, but with a focus on a much wider range of music, more specifically college rock and hip-hop. And unlike Rolling Stone, Spin Magazine would take a much more sensationalist approach with their reporting. In Guns N' Roses' early days, they hailed the band as, and I quote, the future of music, along with groups like Public Enemy and Sinead O'Connor. 4 years later, that sentiment had greatly changed. In fact, Spin Magazine would write a story about Guns N' Roses, more specifically Axl Rose, called Guns N' Neuroses, which saw them go to his hometown of Lafayette, Indiana, and interview the people that he ended up growing up with. The story wasn't very favorable, with one former girlfriend of Rose questioning the frontman's story he had previously told the press, and talked about his violent behavior. All in all, it made him seem much less edgy, and one summary was that he seemed like kind of a dick from the interview. Between 1989 and 1991, Guns N' Roses, who were unhappy with their press coverage, did something pretty ballsy. The Morning Call newspaper would write in 1991, and I quote, "The members of Guns N' Roses have been largely inaccessible during the last 2 years, only heightened their mystique. They've kept a tight control over the media. Earlier this year, they required reporters and photographers from the United Kingdom to sign contracts, giving the group full copy control and copyright over stories and pictures, with $100,000 fines as punishment for violators." The newspaper would also interview the band's publicist at the time, Bryn Bridenthal, who added, "The contracts were designed for a few members of the press who were giving the band trouble. The band was having trouble with fabricated interviews." Well, one of the publications who got their hands on the contract would be Spin Magazine, who would publish Guns N' Roses' press contract in one of their issues, and they would ask the readers to sign it and submit it to Guns N' Roses to request an interview with the band, and 10,000 readers did just that, and it left Guns N' Roses camp pretty embarrassed. As for the vitriol that was aimed at Mick Wall of Kerrang!, that seemed to start thanks to the 1989 MTV Video Music Awards that famously saw Vince Neil of Motley Crue sucker punch Izzy Stradlin as he walked off the stage after performing with Tom Petty. Neil had learned that Stradlin had allegedly assaulted his wife a few weeks earlier at the Cat House Club. Also in attendance that night was Rose, who had some words for Neil, but nothing got physical at that point in time. It was after the VMAs Neil gave an interview to Kerrang! Magazine where he talked about punching Stradlin, recalling that he, and I quote, "punched that dick Stradlin and broke his effing nose," and claimed that, and I quote, "Izzy hit my wife a year before I hit him." It was shortly after the interview was published that Rose stormed into Mick Wall's apartment one night, wanting Neil to apologize for lying and wanting to challenge the frontman to a fight, telling the writer, and I quote, "Personally, I don't think he has the balls. Any way you want to go, guns or knives, mother effer." Wall would call up Rose ahead of publishing his response to confirm if that's what he actually wanted to be quoted as saying, to which Rose responded, "No man, I still stand by every effing word." Kerrang! Would end up publishing the interview with Rose in April of 1990. It wasn't long after that Mick Wall started receiving calls from Guns N' Roses people wanting to hear the transcriptions of the actual interview that took place. Rose would later claim that he never made such statements, and hence why Mick Wall was named in the song. Get in the Ring would be written by Axl Rose, Duff McKagan, and Slash, and McKagan in his first book, It's So Easy and Other Lies, would chart the song's origins to the summer of 1989, when the band had temporarily relocated from their home base of Los Angeles to Chicago to get away from a lot of distractions. Duff would talk about the song in an interview with Kerrang in 1991, stating, and I quote, "We have a song called Why Do You Look at Me When You Hate Me?" which is basically about critics. Like, we were on tour and we'd read the local paper the next day, and you'd read about the show and it would say that we sucked. And then it would say what songs we played, and obviously the guy wasn't even there at the show, or it was obvious in the review or the interview that the guy didn't like us to begin with. They should have gotten another journalist from the newspaper or the magazine or whatever to do it. As for the crowd chanting part, that was taken from an actual concert during the Use Your Illusion tour that the band played in Saratoga Springs, New York in the spring of '91. Here's MTV News reporting on the track shortly before the release of the albums, and what Bob Guccione Jr. had to say in response to Axl Rose's challenge.
A song called Get in the Ring, off one of the 2 new Guns N' Roses albums that are due out this coming week. Among other rude things, Rose charges that Spin publisher Bob Guccione Jr., Hit Parader editor Andy Sesher, and Circus Magazine have printed lies instead of the things we said, and he threatens to, quote, kick their asses. Guccione, following in the footsteps of Motley Crue singer Vince Neil, quickly issued a press release saying he's ready to duke it out with Rose, and noting that he's studied karate. Circus publisher Gerald Rothberg declared himself outraged by Rose's charge that the magazine printed lies about Guns N' Roses, but Andy Sesher at Hit Parader said he was just thankful for the free publicity.
And at least one of them says he's ready to rock and roll. Bob Guccione Jr., editor and publisher of Spin magazine, gets a large share of abuse in Axl's song, and Guccione's now issued his own challenge, saying, quote, "If Rose really wants to do some media bashing, he can start with me. And if he really wants to get in the ring, I volunteer." This is the second time this year Axl has been challenged to a fight after Motley Crue's Vince Neil several weeks back. Axl also targets Hit Parader magazine and Circus magazine in the song. However, another member of Guns N' Roses was able to shed a bit of light on the Get in the Ring track recently. Guitarist Slash spoke with our colleagues at MTV Europe as the band was wrapping up a European tour. Slash says that Axl's rant against the rock press started out as a totally spontaneous ad-lib, and that the band decided to leave it on the finished track.
These are people that just completely misrepresented us, and it was high profile. And we were like sick of it. We were like, screw you, you know? And we've gotten to the point where we don't think it's that important to kiss ass to the press and stuff, because really what this band's all about is the music that we play and the people we play for. And these people, you know, people believe what they read. TV and media in general, that's like their lifeline, you know.
Guitarist Izzy Stradlin would leave the band in late 1991 and criticize the approach Rose took with the song, saying, "Axl's real critical of himself and his anger seems to propel him in a lot of ways. That song, Get in the Ring, I really love a lot of the lyrics just because they're really aggressive. Axl played guitar in that track as well. That was the first time I saw him play electric guitar and he did pretty well. But with all the names at the end, I was thinking, I wouldn't have slagged off people on my record." Years later, Rose would appear on the Eddie I Know Everybody Trunk VH1 program, That Metal Show, and was asked about the track looking back. He seemed to express some regret over the whole thing, saying, "That was not my idea, you know, that was Tom Zutaut and Duff McKagan's idea. Zutaut was the A&R guy who signed G&R back in the day. Because there was this blank space in the song, and we've got to do something, and they were like, why don't you just go off on Andy Sesher and Bob Guccione Jr., and sure, yeah, and I eventually did, and everyone was happy with it, but when it hit the fan, everybody disappeared, and I was naive and didn't realize the political wars going on between the different publicists at the record labels and their relationships with Rolling Stone and Spin and whatever. So I was set up, but no one stepped forward to say anything." That does it for today's video, guys. Thanks for watching. Be sure to like button and subscribe. We'll see you again in Rock and Roll True Story sticker.